Good afternoon, Manuel. It's so nice seeing you. And I can see the beautiful part of Madrid behind you. And of course, it's the first time I'm having this connection with your university, but this university is young, but also quite energetic and growing very, very fast. Congratulations on that. And congratulations to the success that university has. And I'm so happy that even virtually you can take part in our conference in Singapore. And we all hope that next year we will continue our collaboration, and you'll be able to be a part of our next year's conference. So in the meantime, let's discuss a couple of issues that are very, very important for everybody these days. Of course, the world is changing very fast, and changing because of technological changes. To be honest, I would have preferred that technology would have been contributing to health and medical and well-being much more and much quicker. It does, but not with the same pace as any other place like space, artificial intelligence, and elsewhere. But in any case, things change in medical services, how they communicate, how the information about patients is transported, how they are doing surgery, what sort of equipment. There are more lasers, there are more robots. In this sort of circumstances, how do you educate your students, especially in the health or related sectors, where there are so many changes and so quickly?
Well, Armen, first of all, thank you. It's a real pleasure and a real honor, no, to be here with you. And I'm really sorry I cannot be in Singapore, but at least we can have this exchange. So on tech and education, no, and I happen to work in an institution that is somewhat almost obsessed by this question. How is technology going to affect the future of work, the future of research? How should it be affecting pedagogy? I think my first reflection is we shouldn't build teaching environments that are radically different from the places that our graduates are going to inhabit. So as a general rule, I am convinced that we need to incorporate technology into the classroom, into our pedagogy, into the tools that our students use. And this is, it might sound evident, but in fact, it wasn't. When ChatGPT was rolled out, a lot of our students started using it. And many of our peer institutions came out with statements and policies banning the use of generative AI tools in the classroom. They equated them to plagiarism, and they banned them. And I think that's a mistake. I think that's a real mistake, because they need to learn to use the things that they're going to have at their disposal when they graduate. Plus, if we think that our students are going to compete with the tools, which this banning mentality sort of enhances, this idea that, well, they better not use the tool because we want them to be good at what the tool is very good at doing, that's a mistake, because these tools are only going to get better and better. So we better teach them to do something different to what the tools do very well. And I think that's important. Now, the second point is they can be huge enhancers of research. So not just on teaching and pedagogy, but also on research. Many of these tools are going to change entire fields and how research is done. So we have to train our researchers and encourage them to use these technologies and hire people with expertise in these methodologies. And lastly, and this is a final point on this, which is on experience, on the type of spaces that we build. We have a teaching model here called liquid learning, which is basically what it says is that technology is here to enhance learning. So how can we use technology to allow our students to have other experiences, to connect remotely to the classroom from places where they're doing things that are relevant for them? So all of our classes are hybrid. 100% of our classes are now hybrid. So people can connect remotely. And I think on average, maybe about 20% of our students are connecting remotely at any point to our classes. And this is useful because some of our students are doing volunteer work, or they're doing internships somewhere, or they're collaborating with institutions somewhere, and they cannot be here face-to-face, so they can connect. And these tools are there to facilitate learning, so and to provide greater experiences to the students. So across all of these things, on research, on teaching, and on student experience, I see technology as being fundamental, and we need to find ways to incorporate it into our practices. I think there have to be rules and there have to be limits, and sometimes you can ban them because they make no sense in a particular setting, and that might be justified. But overall, I think that this shouldn't be the mentality. I think, in fact, it should be the opposite. We should be very much pushing for the use and the integration of many of these tools into our day-to-day working.
That's encouraging to hear, because at the end of the day, you cannot stop evolution. I think teaching years ago, 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago, a lot of students were getting high marks because they were remembering things. Basically, their database in their brain was good enough. They were just learning things by heart. And because they could answer a question in a form of releasing the data or information about this or that fact, they're getting high remarks rather than getting high remarks because they could use their analytical skills and find a solution or something else, which in any case in their future life would be needed. And in the reality is that today the world has changed. I think a lot of people in ordinary life, they don't bother to remember things because they have their friend, Mr. or Mrs. Google, I don't know what gender is Google, and they get any answer for that. And they don't bother even to remember. I think that the skill that after that is needed, can you put all of this data together and come to a conclusion or a decision, or you can't. So it's more about that. And of course, that takes me to my second question to you, but you mentioned artificial intelligence. There is this hype now all over the world. I mean, the scare of artificial intelligence and what will happen starting from that artificial intelligence will take over jobs and everything, ending up with Armageddon, but that artificial intelligence will take over the power over the humans. In these circumstances, what and how do you teach, and what is your approach there?
So there's sort of two levels, I think, of challenge here. No, one is I think there's a real case to be made for regulating and governing AI properly. I think it's a very consequential technology. I mean, just look at the potential effect that it can have on the public debate through the editing of texts and the production of text or images or video and the dissemination of fake text or fake news. I mean, that's just one small area where you can see this. At a very large scale, it might be an existential threat to the sustainability of humanity if it's not properly governed. I mean, just as nuclear energy and nuclear weapons were at some point. So I'm very encouraged by efforts to regulate some of the uses of AI and some of the developments and deployments. Now, the EU is about to put out the AI Act, which is probably the largest single regulatory framework of artificial intelligence out there for the time being, although the Secretary General of the UN has convened a high-level panel on AI, and he's called for a reflection on maybe a future multilateral body on the governance of AI, maybe an agency. And he's sort of, I think the thinking is similar to the nuclear, to the atomic energy agency. So I'm really encouraged by these things, and I think that there are effects of these technologies that we need to take into account, and maybe some of the uses need to be banned outright and others need to be regulated. Now, on the education space, what I think this does is it furthers what you mentioned. So AI will further decrease, in fact, very significantly, the value of information arbitrage. So knowing facts and convening and sort of conveying, and transmitting facts will continue to plummet in value, which is one of the effects of the digital revolution. So if in the academic space, if we believe we're in the business of transferring information, we're in for a shock, because our students are going to be able to access this in a very easy and sophisticated way, maybe much more than in the past through these tools. And by the way, you're convening a conference on the future of health and health and well-being. If you look at the space of BMI, of brain-machine interfaces, you can very easily imagine a world where we have much more seamless and capable BMIs, these systems that will connect the brain to computers and to the cloud. And imagine, Armen, just for a second, what that will do to the value of information arbitrage. If you can connect to Wikipedia, you can connect to the processing capacity of the cloud, And you will do this from the cortex level. So this will be, some people have spoken of a digital neocortex. So if you project this forward, let alone AI is one of these steps, I think very fundamental steps in this direction. But think of BMIs, no, the following step. Then what is the function of academic institutions? Well, clearly it's not in the business of just moving information around and certifying that somebody contains, has managed to accumulate this amount of information on this or that. No, it's different. And the question is, what is different? And different is, I think, all of the space of soft skills, managing others, empathy, negotiation, mediation, building complex arguments, sort of systems thinking capacity. I mean, all of these, sort of this huge cluster of things, I think becomes much more valuable than in the past. I think also the idea or the convening capacity of academia will remain valuable. Who we sit you with in a classroom, who's your faculty, who's your colleague, which cultures do you get to engage with, will remain extremely valuable. Even if you have ChatGPT right next to you, that's, it's still valuable for you to be engaging with people that are very diverse, have different views. And I think, and this is the last two bits, is the experiential element of education. What you experience as part of your education studies as a human being, conversations you have, feelings you develop, engagement with different cultures. Again, I think that's fundamental. And the last bit is we see a reflourishing of the humanities, of philosophy, of anthropology, of history, of these disciplines that are fundamental to understanding the world. They're non-technical, but we think they're going to be even more important than they've been in the past as rudders for the future. So if you add all of that up, that still gives you a mission for academia and a vision, but it's so different to what we've been doing for the past, hundreds of years, that it's going to take a long time for universities, I think, to adjust. But there's still a lot of value in what we do, I think, and there will continue to be.
Well, you are a young university, and for the definition of being young is the capability of learning. I think if basically, unfortunately, when we are at the early stage of our life, we are just bored, we know nothing. And within 1 year, we learn so much. And in 2 years, we are geniuses compared with where we started. I think being young is very much connected with the capability and the pace of learning. So you're a young university, young head of university. I'm sure that you will manage to get it right, to learn how to manage in this complex world. But this world has another complexity, except the artificial intelligence. I personally don't believe that artificial intelligence is the biggest threat to our humanity. There are others that we're ignoring, but let's leave that aside. But we're living more and more in a world that is less predictable, uncertain. And in my vocabulary, I have a theory calling it, as a former physicist, quantum world. And the quantum world has its own rules of behavior. And now in this quantum world where things are uncertain, unpredictable, a lot of people start sort of losing interest to the future. Because the future is uncertain, it's not clear where we are going, what's going to happen, what's next. And this is a worldwide phenomena. In that sort of circumstances, I wonder how easy or difficult it is for a university that is not only there to educate people, but also to find and refine and also support talent of leadership. So if you are preparing future leaders, what are the qualities that they will need in this unpredictable world?
So, we've thought about that quite a bit, and I think in order to answer that, it's useful to try to assess sort of the features of the world, the features of our world, and how do you train people that can navigate them? No, and when you look at the environment we inhabit, I would argue that it has at least three core characteristics. So one is velocity. We live in an exponentially changing environment because of technology and other changes. And this comes up, I mean, you see this in many, many metrics of social change. So the evolution of population, the generation of data, our computing capacity, all of these have an exponential performance over many long periods, many years, no long periods of time. So exponentiality, I think, calls for foresight, which is something that you were saying, Armen. So we need to develop sort of a science of anticipation, the capacity to be almost obsessively looking forward, trying to draw scenarios and adjust to them. And this is it's a little bit sacrilegious, in an academic institution, because we have built a notion of knowledge that is always looking backwards. So you acquire and build knowledge that is almost always looking backwards, trying to explain the past and maybe throw some light into the present. But this idea of anticipating change is very polemical. But I think in a world that is changing as rapidly as ours, this is fundamental. I mean, we need to do it. If not, we're going to bump into accidents. By the way, from an academic point of view, it also means we need to do lifelong learning as well. So not only do we need folks with foresight, but we need people that are willing to reskill, re-educate themselves, keep themselves updated. No. The second characteristic in my mind is complexity. So the challenges we face today are super complex, including climate change, the management of international finance, issues that have to do with migration, things that have to do with the management of conflict, for example. Complexity calls for interdisciplinarity and systems thinking, which I mentioned. So this idea of connecting the dots, people that can bring different perspectives onto particular challenges. And I think that's very important in leadership, to be quite frank. And I find this to be a fundamental feature of leaders. And in my mind, the last feature would be sort of interdependence. This idea that things that are global challenges are originated locally, and what happens locally, and sort of this interconnection between the global and the local. So we need diverse and global mindsets, and this is easier said than done. We need people that speak different languages, that have lived in different cultures, that understand that what happens in Wuhan has an impact in New York, or what happens in Silicon Valley affects whatever sector it is in Spain. And this is very important, and academic institutions can play a role in doing this. So these three features call for a particular type of leader. And the last comment would be that irrespective of these three, I think the element of ethics is going to, and I go back to this idea of the humanity, but ethics as a core principle of leadership, and the sort of the public service component, which I think is a derivative of ethics, working for the benefit of others. This idea of those that have had opportunities have this obligation, moral obligation, to serve if they can and they're given the chance, and to live by an ethics rulebook, and to govern and construct policy by that rulebook, I think is fundamental. So I would call for a response to these three forces, and then this idea of ethics as a foundation for leadership.
Well, thank you very much. I think it's nice to hear you, and it's nice to speak about this unpredictable world, because we live every moment of that. Even I lived now speaking to you, because when we started talking, I just forgot to close the curtain. Basically, I'm living in a world, because initially nothing was predicting that the sun will come out. And while you are speaking, I see myself in the screen, and the sun is moving on over my face. But that's the new world that we live. I think you cannot predict anything. And if you forget to close your curtain or whatever, then you will be in a position that will be one moment of a sunshine, and the other moment it will be dark, and so on and so on. That's the new world we are living. And to finalize what you were saying, I have a suggestion. I think there is one fundamental idea that I live with that is that if you understand nature, if you understand the laws of the nature, I mean, most of them are the laws of physics, then you can understand everything. And you can understand, and it's not only me, the great giants of quantum physics and 20th century physics knew about this. So the issue is here that if you understand nature, then you can apply your understanding also to the human society as well. So at the end of the day, we're a part of this nature. We think we are advanced, we think that we have this freedom of acting and so on and so forth. But when we are a lot of us, we start behaving as a statistical object, and that object in most cases behaves like a quantum object as well. So my suggestion is maybe your university will be the first one that will introduce to humanities a course of quantum mechanics and quantum politics, and I'll be happy to give the first lecture. So thank you very much, Manuel. This was very interesting. And I hope we will have the chance in the future to continue our dialogue on education and fundamentals of education, especially in the future, because we have to look into the future.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. The topic, our new topic, is political and economic decisions versus costs of health and well-being. I think it's a very interesting topic. I think you can look at it as a topic of worldwide complexity, or we can even take that topic and squeeze that on the size of problems of even one individual. But that's definitely a very important issue. And if we start with an individual, of course, issues related to individuals and behavior dramatically changed after the COVID, when a lot of people had to stay home, a lot of people had to interact from home, and a lot of people had to work from home or be educated from home. And staying home means also being a sort of alone. So staying home added to our understanding how do we interact with the world. Somehow after the COVID, we became a bit lonelier because we got used to being lonely. We used to working from home. A lot of people continue working from home. A lot of companies are comfortable having their employees working from home. But parallel to that, which could be seen as a positive thing, there's something which is negative, is loneliness, is basically opening doors to individual sort of an unhealthy situation, especially related to mental health and problems related to mental health issues, especially among young people. I'm raising this question because you're running a university. I'm sure that this is not a secondary issue. The younger people live in this complex world, and a lot of them, because of the Facebook, because of the phone, because of the COVID, are becoming more and more lonely, and that's creates a lot of mental issues. So I would like to hear from you.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a very complex topic, but it's clearly becoming a very urgent one. So I'll give you a figure. I think on average, roughly across universities like ours and peer institutions, very quickly, it's close to about 10% of our student body now seeks some form of mental health assistance every year. So it might be 7, it might be 6, it might be 8, it might be 9%, but on average per year, you're getting a very large number of your students, and this includes, by the way, the undergrad population, which is, I think, what you're referring to more particularly. These very young people that are with us since the age of 17, 18, most of the time, and then up to their early 20s. We are unsure about why this is happening, this increase in basically in mental health incidents in the student population. Most of these cases are not that serious. I mean, they require assistance, but they're related to stress, associated with pressure from their program or others. We're unsure about why this is occurring. I mean, we're truly unsure. We think that there's an element of more reporting, which is good. So more sensitivity to these cases. So they report it and they come and seek assistance, which is great. So we're providing much more assistance. I mean, this is a much more central service now in universities than it was 10, 20, let alone 30 or 40 years ago, when this was truly not provided by most higher education institutions around the world. So there might be something to reporting. There might be some sort of long tail of COVID and the effects of COVID, because we still have undergrads in our classrooms that went through the COVID experience, which clearly produced a spike in mental health issues associated to loneliness, to depression, and to others. And then we also think that there's something to the environment. And here I think social media is playing a fundamental role to the environment of both expectations, social pressure, issues of online bullying and online abuse of different kinds. Because, you know, also we've seen, by the way, this is an interesting snippet into how this might look like. So in the past, when you had an instance of bullying or exclusion from a group, you would suffer it for a short duration of time in school, and then you would go home and it would stop. But now it won't stop, no, because of these platforms that will accompany you. So we're almost certain that there's an incidence of these platforms on mental health issues. Now, our obligation is to treat them very seriously, to provide all of the support that is necessary, and to make sure that people come out of our institutions, they graduate successfully, and they do well in their careers. So this is not a minor issue or something that we should brush off. No, this is something that belongs to the personal space of our students. We think, particularly in the undergrad level, that we have to be there, and if they seek our assistance, we need to be able to provide it. But you're right, and it's there, and it's very present, and we need to pay attention to it.
I think the world is changing. Probably at our conference, we will also discuss new ways of releasing pressure on the minds of people. I think I've seen a lot of research and also discussion statistics that there are non-traditional way of releasing tension and pressure on individuals. The ones that before were not allowed, were not taken seriously, or were not there. I think it's a new world, and individuals are under huge pressure. But it's not only they are under a huge pressure, but the one important question that comes here, and I would like to ask you about, put this question to you, because you also have quite a significant experience in your life working for in public office, and this is about health access
Yes.
to health, and how do you do that? And then access to health is worldwide issue, and it's not only connected, are you living in a rich environment or poor environment? I mean, I was shocked when I found that in one of the states of United States, where you have billionaires living in one area, the access to healthcare, basically to a proper, good quality hospital, was not there, which was amazing. But there's an access issue in Africa, in India, in many countries. So your thoughts about how do we make people's life not only longer but healthier? The access is public access is the most important thing.
Yeah, well, I have a very European answer, but which is, I think that there's two levels to this, no, in my mind. One is, to be quite frank, it's about the societies we build, because health is a much broader issue than, I mean, just, sort of access to healthcare services. So, and this has been demonstrated actually very widely. There's a wonderful book called The Spirit Level that did a very broad study on the impact of inequality, for example, on metrics of healthcare, on life satisfaction, on life expectancy, on diseases that are associated to stress or habits like diabetes, and many other heart conditions and many others. So we know equitable, fair societies actually produce better healthcare outcomes. So I think there's something there to this idea of a social contract, an environment where there's general equity, that I think it's desirable. So these levels, these highly unequal places, I think tend to produce, on the whole, for very psychological and other types of reasons, they tend to produce very tilted healthcare outcomes. Now, the second bit, which is maybe even more European, is I am a firm believer in public healthcare. I think that this is a mechanism that increases access, increases the quality of healthcare, and in fact reduces overall spending in healthcare as a proportion of GDP. And I'll give you a very clear example of this. I was in government when COVID hit. Spain was very hard hit because we were hit very early on. I don't know if you remember this, but it was first China, and then it was the northern bit of Italy, and then it was Spain. And Spain was hit very hard across the board. And we worked very, very intensely to make sure that the response to this was very equitable. And we leveraged all of the tools of the public healthcare system to address this. So in fact, the little private healthcare provision that we had in Spain was put at the service of the public healthcare space, so that people wouldn't feel that they were unequally treated. So we made available all the ICU beds for everybody, and others. No, when the vaccines came, the public vaccination campaign, well, the campaign was public, was free. It was done according to risk categories and many others. So this idea of justice in the response, in my mind, was fundamental to the success of the response, and to people feeling that they belong to a system that takes care of them. No, so I wouldn't want to be in an environment, quite frankly, where those that can afford healthcare can afford the best healthcare in the world, and then the rest cannot. So I'm a firm believer in this, and I think it produces better outcomes across the board.
Well, yeah, in your answer, you used 2 or 3 times the word European, and then you described very in detail the essence how you're fighting COVID in Spain. Let me ask you a very frank question. Okay, you describe how you handled COVID in Spain. What about Europe? Can you honestly tell me how do things assess how Europe as a general responded to COVID?
So I think there are 3 categories of, when you look at the response to COVID, to be quite frank, and I tell you, I was in government at the time, you can imagine how we were grilled in Congress and in the media about the quality of the response in this country and in other places. It was so we did a lot of responding to requests about how we were addressing things. But I think in essence, you had sort of 3 buckets of countries. You had a bucket of countries that did very poorly on this because they didn't take it seriously. They thought it was a joke. They thought it, in Brazil, I remember Bolsonaro calling it una gripiña, which is like a little flu. So you had those. Thankfully, there weren't many, but there were a few, and they're outliers in terms of the excess deaths and what happened. Then you had another bucket of countries which were maybe small states, island states that did very well because they could isolate themselves. New Zealand is clearly in that category, to some extent Australia and a few others. And then you have the majority of countries which were somewhere in the middle. They took this very seriously. They had to do a lot of learning. Some of them made mistakes and things. They got other things right. But on the whole, they did as well as they could. And I think most of Europe actually falls into that category.
But there were European states that basically were taking it sort of a much more relaxedly rather than energetically, especially with vaccination and so on, no?
So some of them, there was a Swedish case, which was a real outlier for some time, sort of this idea of sort of trying to achieve herd immunity. I think in the end, actually, if you looked at the response, it ended up being much blurrier than that. They did actually intervene quite a bit in trying to reduce mobility and in trying to reduce the possibility for contagion, because the issue here, was basically ICU capacity and treatment capacity. That when they were truly overwhelmed, then the deaths really skyrocketed because you couldn't even treat the cases that were treatable. So everybody was trying to in fact try to push the pandemic curve down so that it didn't overwhelm our healthcare systems. So on the whole, I think the management was good. There was one big mistake, if you ask me, in the European case, which was, on the one hand, it was a big success, which was our vaccine purchasing program. Huge success done at the EU level. We bought vaccines very early on, basically January 21, when this had begun in earnest in March 2020. I think that was very early. I remember speaking to very knowledgeable epidemiologists and virologists, and they were telling me that basically they were saying to me that we wouldn't have a vaccine in less than 12 or 14, in 10 years was how long it taken the last time to develop a vaccine. So imagine how successful we were to be able to be deploying this very small numbers in December 2020, large numbers in January, February. Now, that success, I think we also managed poorly because we didn't distribute enough to other countries around the world. And I think that has had a big impact on the image of Europe and on the image of the West and its management of this crisis. So if there's one thing that I think we should have done differently, was sort of the international cooperation on that front, to be quite frank.
Well, thank you. You answered quite frankly here, and I think it's important because the debates on did we really did it well or not? And even questions that did we really needed vaccination or not is going to continue, and people will be doubtful on many points there. So that discussion will continue. But let me take our
Can I say one thing, just a quick one-liner?
yeah.
I was in office at the time. I can tell you, the moment the vaccines came in, the moment they came in, the pandemic curve came down, ICU occupancy came down, deaths came down like a rocket. So they came down like one of the SpaceX rockets landing back. I tell you, it stopped being a public health concern very quickly. So, you know, they might have secondary sort of issues further down the line. I'm not an expert in vaccines, but I tell you, when you're there and you have 900 deaths a day in Spain, a country of 40 odd million people, this was heaven sent. This was heaven. We were losing close to 1,000, and these were the people testing positive for COVID. Most likely, there were other cases we were missing of people that were dying of this thing. So, I mean, I'm sure there are details to this, but I tell you, when you're there and at the time, this looked like a miracle to us. But just a perception issue.
Well, thank you very much. But we have to remember also that health and well-being and our long life is also a very individual thing. And in my case, as an individual, as a president of a republic, I had to show an example, and I was one of the first to start taking vaccines. And I took vaccines when nobody was taking it, because I took the Chinese one that was open, to show the public that you should not be afraid. So in the meantime, I took five vaccines, 2 Chinese, 2 Pfizer, Moderna, and I got a COVID, a very heavy one. So health is a very individual one. I think you can look at all the statistics of it, but every and each individual has their own experience of life, and they will judge on the success of the government, of the international community, WHO, based also on their personal success or failure. And of course, I would like to take our dialogue where we started, speaking about unpredictability of the world and difficulties that we are facing worldwide. And in many cases, a lot of societies worldwide are polarized, divided, and this is not a situation where you have polarization in only United States. There's a polarization in a place like Armenia. There's a polarization in major European states. It's a worldwide phenomena. And this is again connected with the fact that it's not clear where we are going and what is our future. And in the absence of the clarity in the future, the sort of ideas that have the features of pessimism is taking over. And you are running an institution which is basically an institution. It's a train to the future. You are educating young people, and how you are managing at the end of the day to teach young people to continue living today in this polarized and unoptimistic yet world, and to keep their optimism and to be sure that they can restore both predictability and optimism in their society. Especially, this is true in Western societies, in Europe, United States, and there's an explanation for that.
Yeah. No, very, very, very markedly, actually. If we just did a very big study. We just celebrated our 50th anniversary. And for the closing of the 50th anniversary of the university, we did an event called the Next 50, where we tried to explore the world in 50 years. And we did a big report, one of our centers did, and we did a big poll across citizens of G20 countries and their perceptions of the future. And it's very interesting, because in the East, there's much more optimism about what the future is going to bring in terms of wealth, in terms of access to healthcare, in terms of what technologies are going to do to communication, to education. It's in the Western world, there's a lot more pessimism. And now I think I think there's a very clear explanation to that, which is, the growing sense of fracture of our social contract in the West. And if you look at what's happened economically in most advanced economies over the last 30 years, what you'll see is that there's been a hollowing out of the middle of our income distribution. So the middle class has seen wages decline in real terms or stagnate over a long period of time. And that hollowing out of the middle of our economy is leading to the hollowing out of the middle of our political spectrum. So these trends are correlated, very heavily correlated. And it's that process of political polarization that is producing the political convulsion that we're living in the West, with political forces that are, it's interesting. I mean, sort of internationally, they're defending the upending of the international order, the trade order, the human rights order, the regional integration order, including the EU and other processes of that nature. But domestically, these forces here in Poland, in Hungary, in the US, in the UK, they're leading to this sort of process of democratic erosion, because to a large extent, they're eroding the legitimacy of democratic institutions. And by the way, Trump, in my mind, is a good example of this, because even, irrespective of what you think of his policies, for example, some of them might be great, foreign and domestic, but what makes that administration unique is its capacity to hurt democratic institutions in the US, no? The legitimacy of Congress, of the media, ultimately the legitimacy of the electoral process. But it's a typical case, and we've seen this in Latin America in many places and in Europe in many places. So, no wonder there's pessimism in this part of the world, because when you look at the future for the middle class, if it's anything similar to the past 20, 30 years, it might be a future of stagnation or inequality, lack of access to housing or harder access to housing, for example, or to education or to healthcare. And by the way, Armen, just a final comment, because this is a real failure of intelligence, because we are not poorer than we.
You mean natural intelligence?
Sorry, natural. Yeah.
Natural intelligence, not artificial one.
No, it's absolutely natural and human in this sense. So we can attribute the failure entirely to us, which is, we are wealthier in every metric than we were 30 years ago, right? We're at record levels of GDP. So the fact that we have these levels of fracture internally is a failure of managing abundance and not distributing it properly and justly. So it drives me crazy that we haven't been able to sort of rebuild this new social contract that is much more sustainable, equitable, green, digital. I mean, one can imagine these things, but we've been unable to implement it as societies, and this is leading to this fracturing. So, and this is so much linked. I was mentioning before the work by these academics, the spirit level folks. This is so clearly linked to healthcare and to wellness, that it's a huge failure on the part of our societies not to do this well. So I think we have a challenge ahead of us, which is to rebuild our societies in a much more solid and just footing.
Well, I think I agree fully with you, and that's why we started this initiative of Advance Tomorrow, speaking about not only future challenges, but also how we can help to change this world. And it's not about the numbers of our economic successes or how more rich we are. More rich doesn't always mean that we are more happy. More rich doesn't always mean that we are more healthy. And the more rich doesn't even mean that we're living a better life, or we will be living longer. I think happiness is something which is much more complex and complicated than just economic growth and financial richness and so on and so forth. So we are living in a very interesting, complex, but beautiful world, and we have to find solutions. And thank you very much, Manuel. And I really enjoyed our discussions, and I'm looking forward for our future collaboration, both in our conference or at your university, and to try to make this world a little bit better by bringing common sense. Thank you again.
Absolutely, Armen. Thank you. It's a real pleasure.
Thank you very much. Have a nice day. You are living in a wonderful environment. That's an environment that can make you healthy, both physically and mentally, because they will force you to do a lot of exercise. And you will be living in a very nice well-being environment because you are surrounded by young people. I mean, a lot of energy, and that will help you to live longer. So from that point of view, you are in the right place.
I do have my kids, which are many and very little yet. So I have that detraction of energy from that, but I get energy here. So it's a good balance. But no, I'm very much looking forward to having you here, Armen. We're gonna have a great time, I think, and it's gonna be interesting. But thank you for this, and I'm sorry I cannot be with you in Singapore, but I'm sure it's gonna be fascinating. So I hope it goes very well.
I think the most important thing that we have to continue living healthier, longer life, then we'll have other opportunities. Thank you.
Absolutely. Bye-bye. Bye-bye, Armen. Cheers.
Cheers.